Chapter 7. Eva Marie Taffy and Tony Taffy meet Maarten DeVries and John Joseph. John Joseph finished his shrimp omelet and Mississippi fries and spicy sprout salad with oil and vinegar and sipped on his frothy cappuccino. He gazed with unstated suspicion at Maarten DeVries, who sat across the table from him in the dining room of his hotel suite. How could anyone be indifferent to food? Joseph asked himself. Did that not suggest indifference to life itself? And DeVries was Belgian-born. Didn't the Flemish and Walloons savor every morsel of their refined cuisine? Not DeVries. He nibbled on the occasional candy bar and the nightly bologna sandwich. Did DeVries have the requisite passion to commodore a viable third party? The two men were seated in the spacious, if not elegant, Dizzy Dean suite of the Cancun Hotel in Biloxi, Mississippi. Joseph had jetted down from his horse farm in Kentucky the night before so that DeVries could introduce him to the Eclectic Party's nominee for the Mississippi governor's race, Eva Marie Taffy. DeVries spent the night at a more economical motel about 20 miles to the north. They had agreed to meet their candidate and her son at her convenience so as to not break the pace of her whirlwind campaign. John Joseph studied the decor. Dizzy Dean, the colorful native son of Mississippi, had left a lot of memories for the decorator to play with. There were portraits of Dizzy and his brother Paul, as well as the portraits of the legendary Gas House Gang. There were framed newspapers featuring Dizzy shaking hands with dignitaries and presidents. There were locked glass display cases that held his old contracts, autographs, baseball cards, and other memorabilia. The walls were crowded with baseball antiquities. The ostentatiously erotic Bridget Whale slithered in next to John Joseph. Bridget was tall, shapely, young, and gorgeous. She squeezed him and planted a dramatic kiss on Joseph's lips. "Wish me luck, darling." "Good luck, sweetness," John Joseph cooed, and the two men watched as she shook back her caramel-colored hair and wiggled away in her short red dress with green pinstripes. Joseph had earlier slipped her a $25,000 gift card that could be redeemed for casino chips, and she sauntered off to test her fortunes. As the door closed, Joseph restarted the conversation immediately. He did not want to be complimented on his conquest or his fine taste in women. He wanted now, as always, for those things to be givens. "Run it by me once more. Why are we running, Taffy? I know it's too late now. She's got the nomination, but why did we support her?" "She shares our values. She reads Mises and Saz and Sal for entertainment. She's smart and she thinks on her feet. She's a great orator. What else could you want? Maybe a tall cheerleader who starred on the debate team." Joseph was referring to Rubella Winston, a statuesque black woman who was part of the Joseph tsunami that helped the Eclectic Party gain a majority in both houses of Mississippi legislature in the last election. "I suspect she's a carpetbagger." "A beautiful carpetbagger, but a carpetbagger nonetheless," DeVries interjected. Joseph nodded. He usually trusted DeVries' judgment, but he always asked him to justify his choices. "I'm glad to finally meet Miss Taffy." She sounded perky on the phone. DeVries let out a slight groan. Perky is slightly pejorative. It usually describes a short person. She is 4'11", or so I'm told. That sounds right, but she has an executive quality to her. Executive? Yes, you'll see. The two men chatted for another 15 minutes when Chadwick Burroughs, Joseph's semi-famous bodyguard, chirped his cell. "The guests have arrived." Instructions were given, and in minutes Burroughs was holding the door for Eva Marie Taffy and her son Tony. For a shining moment, the room took on a National Geographic flavor. Burroughs, the 7-foot black muscle man, held the door for the two black leprechauns. They, in turn, shook hands with the tall, lanky DeVries, the dark-haired, dark-eyed Dutchman who was fascinated by all things American, but who could never shed that made-in-Europe look. And the wayward pygmy shook hands with John Joseph, the diminutive, blonde-haired, blue-eyed former trillionaire who was 37 but still looked like he was 12. Burroughs repositioned himself outside, and to everyone's surprise, Tony Taffy took control of the meeting. He addressed John Joseph with debonair salesmanship. He had invented a cloaking device for IP addresses. This one was different from the other cloaking devices because it did not set off flags by hiding the user's IP address. Tony Taffy's product supplied the detectors with false IP addresses that were either randomly generated or the actual addresses of actual parties. John Joseph expressed his reluctance to examine the product. He had been involved with a startup that was developing a similar item, and there was the possible ethical briar patch should Eva Marie Taffy win the election. He also advised the suave pitchman to invest in sound legal counsel prior to releasing his product to the public. His own startup had faced numerous delays in trying to get sanctioned by NSA, Homeland Security, and others. They all demanded source code and keys and cheats, and even after those things were provided, there were still delays. Despite the polite brush-off, John Joseph soon found himself discussing another product of Tony Taffy's imagination, the Blue Shield. The Blue Shield was a covert surveillance system usually installed in automobiles to secretly record events in both audio and video. The unit utilized pinhole cameras that would broadcast signals to an off-site location. Women purchased Blue Shield to protect themselves from predators, and taxi drivers bought it as a safeguard against robbery. But most of the customers were young black and Hispanic men who purchased Blue Shield to protect themselves from police planting evidence in their cars. Tony Taffy gently explained that other secret surveillance systems were faulty because they stored the data on the premises. Blue Shield transferred the data to a safe site the same way cell phones transmit data, and the encrypted signals could only be viewed with a court order. This provided the user a judicially upheld method of escaping wiretapping statutes. Joseph was intrigued. DeVries looked confused. Eva Marie Taffy concealed her thoughts. She wanted to tell her son to sit in silence while the grown-ups talked, but she could not find the words to say that to a young adult and still expect forgiveness. So she held her tongue and let the two men talk. They yapped for hours, but were interrupted by a sobbing Bridget wail. "I lost everything, John. Everything." Joseph dried her eyes by quietly slipping her another gift card and sent her back to the race book. Joseph tried to recapture the magic of the conversation, but it had vanished. He tried to shift the subject to politics, but DeVries and Eva Marie Taffy had lost their focus. DeVries quoted polls and reviewed campaign strategy, but it was stuff already covered. Eva Marie Taffy joked that the next time she would have a private audience, and everyone chuckled. Heads shook and farewells were recited, and Taffy left the room. When the door closed, John Joseph turned to a fidgety DeVries. "Good choice," he stated sincerely. DeVries smiled a broad sigh of relief. "You don't want Winston?" "Who needs a carpetbagger?" Joseph summarized.